Well, downtown, despite all the economic hardship, was still a thriving place. Of course, at that time, the city was really designed for all the commercial, professional, retail, and cultural activities, arts and entertainment that was going on in the city. It was primarily focused on downtown, and all the streetcar lines, bus lines, interurbans terminated in downtown. And so weeknights and weekends, as it was in the 20s and after the Depression, it was still pretty busy downtown. Now, there were a number of theaters in downtown Youngstown. Most of them, by that point, were movie houses, and some were with the big companies like Paramount, which had bought the Liberty Theater in 1928, the Warner Theater, which opened in 1931, the Keith Albee Palace Theater, which opened in 1926. You had the State Theater, 1927, the Park Theater, the Strand, which was right on Central Square in the southeast corner, and the Dome and Hippodrome, I think, were still there, but were more vaudeville oriented, not like the big movie houses, which were much more luxurious and built for motion picture sound. Also of great consequence was, in this time of economic uncertainty and hardship, unionization efforts really were growing to protect the interests of workers in a number of industries, and that included the steel industry. The Steel Workers Organizing Committee was part of the Congress of Industrial Organizations, the CIO, which was run by John L. Lewis, and leading up to May of 1937, something major happened. The U.S. Steel Corporation, which was by far the largest producer in the United States of steel, signed the contract with the Steelworkers Organizing Committee, which was across all of their plants in the United States. And that took everybody by surprise. And so with that success, the SWAC, as it was called, set up and organized an effort to unionize three companies, Youngstown Sheet and Tube, Republic Steel Corporation, and Inland Steel Corporation of Chicago. And it was called the Little Steel Strike because these were all significant players in the industry, but compared to U.S. Steel, they were much smaller.
Surviving Timmons' lengthy introduction to Youngstown, Youngstown rolled into 1934. At that time, entertainment was the desired relaxation for everybody. Movie houses, legitimate stages and theaters were all doing capacity business. But Youngstown's reputation was beginning to take a hit. They had a looming steel strike on the horizon, and the crime rate in the city was rising rapidly.
The Playhouse was featuring The Scarlet Lady, which would introduce Ethel Chambers to the annals of Playhouse history. With almost instant audience acclaim, Chambers would go on to celebrity status in Youngstown with her portrayal of Judith Bliss in Noel Coward's Hay Fever. So convincing was her acting that she would henceforth be known as Judith Chambers in Youngstown. With each success, the Youngstown Playhouse was gaining a national recognition, prompting former Playhouse director Werner Haldane to state in a newspaper article,
"The players pioneering in this community are working together in a spirit of harmony and unselfishness, with an intense desire to bring about a permanent home here, where the art of the drama will establish itself as something fine, cultural, and intellectual."
Oscar Wilde would prove to be a mainstay for the Playhouse, with another hit, The Ideal Husband, which eclipsed his other previously produced work. Even during cold weather, with a coal piled high, audiences still made their way to the drafty Arlington Street Theater to catch a glimpse of the Wilde comedy. Helen Moyer, now Playhouse president, would welcome in Hubbard Kirkpatrick as a new full-time director. Kirkpatrick had significant ties to the fabled Barrymores and would direct the Playhouse's first venture into the world of Shakespeare with A Midsummer Night's Dream in 1935. The 1935-1936 season would be the genesis of a very active time at the Playhouse. Vera Ettinger, better known as Vera Friedman, would make her stage debut in a production of Interference. Friedman loved the Playhouse and was a ball of energy. She would rise rapidly through the ranks, through the years, becoming one of the most iconic individuals through the glory days of the theater. Through all of the productions produced at the Arlington Street Theater, Death Takes a Holiday by Alberto Casella would prove to be one of the best remembered plays of the entire Arlington Street cycle. With a then star-studded cast of favorite Playhouse actors, the Youngstown Telegram touted the Playhouse effort as being a theater in professional ranks. But life on stage was not the only life at the Youngstown Playhouse. It was a theater of many activities. One of the favorites was the annual fundraising ball, the Beaux Arts Ball. In 1935, this flashy affair took place at the Hotel Ohio in downtown Youngstown and was considered to be one of the social events of the year. Attendees would come in costume as one of their favorite characters from a play and enjoy a full orchestra, dancing, food, and the opportunity of dropping a little cash into the Playhouse coffers. It was colorful, it was radiant, and it was attended by anyone who was anyone in Youngstown. Another event, however, garnered the attention of the Youngstown community. The Playhouse production of Ibsen's Hedda Gabler, starring Helen Moyer, was one of the biggest successes of the 1937-1938 season. The show achieved 4 curtain calls, according to Youngstown Telegram critic Charles A. Leedy. At a time when the Great Depression was still lingering on in the country, the Playhouse was still able to crank out box office successes.
The opening show that season was the night of January 16th, and it was a show written by Ayn Rand, and it was a totally different kind of show than the Playhouse was used to doing. It was a fictional courtroom drama based on a murder trial of a famed financier. But the allure of the show to the audience was the fact that the jury for the show was chosen from the audience at each performance. So they determined the end of the show at each performance.
The Playhouse reveled in good productions and good reviews. But Dorothy M. Caru's review of The Importance of Being Earnest would be a big eye-opener for the theater.
While light and amusing entertainment, the show was not so satisfactory from the audience viewpoint as other productions at the Playhouse this season. Individual actors gave splendid performances, but the production as a whole lacked a sense of reality.
Changes, however, were in the works. Theodore Veman would move into the role of the new professional director, replacing the departing Howard Kirkpatrick, and with the change, he directed tremendously successful productions of Mrs. Moonlight and Stage Door. Many productions up to this time had tremendous success at the Playhouse. The Playhouse was untouchable in quality and revenue at this point. But one problem existed. The Playhouse at Arlington Street was old, very old. At a meeting on September the 6th, 1939, at St. John's Parish House, Playhouse President Helen Moyer announced a campaign to raise funds for a new Playhouse facility. Current Playhouse Director Theodore Veman spoke in support of the project.
Youngstown Playhouse is a community center open to every individual in Youngstown who is interested in any field of imaginative effort.
Our Town, the Pulitzer Prize-winning play by Thornton Wilder, would be one of the big hits of the 1939 season. The renowned play had recently closed on Broadway, and the Playhouse production was the first to be done by any community theater in the country. Edward Fuller would play Joe Crowell. Fuller would then go on to Broadway as David Merrick's assistant. Fuller did much of the research for the Broadway production of Gypsy, based on the Park Theater in Youngstown. Our Town was so popular that it went on to play an engagement at Stambaugh Auditorium in Youngstown before 4,500 people.
Fundraising for the new theater was going extremely well. The site that they had chosen was on the corner of Wick Avenue and Bissell Avenue on the city's north side. Now, that was city-owned land at the time that had been chosen by the city for the site of the new city dump.
By September of 1940, Playhouse membership numbered over 1,400. Theater classes were instituted and proved to be so popular that classes were full, with residents still calling to sign up. As a result of the classes, the studio group was started, comprised of youth actors. Their production of Little Women as a Christmas production was so well received that it had to be held over for extra performances on both New Year's Eve and New Year's Day. The Youngstown Players were so prominent by this time that Barclay S. Leatham, chairman of the Department of Drama at Western Reserve University and executive secretary of the National Theater Conference, stated,
Youngstown is known throughout the United States, not only as a steel town, but for its cultural achievements, including the Youngstown Players. Ted Veman is known in theater circles from coast to coast, and Youngstown Players are recognized as one of the most prominent civic theaters in America.
Things were getting anxious at the Playhouse. Delays on the building of the new Playhouse were long and frequent, finally forcing the Playhouse board to make repairs at the Arlington Street Theater. This suggested a more permanent stay at the location. Before long, plans of the new theater were scrapped in favor of purchasing the Ohio Theater on Market Street, an old abandoned movie house. Moving the Playhouse to the south side, a much more developed area at the time, seemed to be a favorable decision. Still at the Arlington location, a production of Mr. and Mrs. North would open in January of 1942. But the excitement over this production was secondary to events which took place 1 month prior, December 7th, 1941, the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor and the entrance of the United States into World War II. Life continued, but no one knew to what extent life would change. How would the war impact not only Youngstown, but the Youngstown Playhouse? By February of 1942, 7-term Playhouse president Helen Moyer would step aside from the office, and new Playhouse president, Mrs. Charles F. Owsley, would now helm the board during the early war years. Patriotism was in high gear during this time, and the Playhouse didn't miss a beat in offering its support for the war effort. 3 productions, The Mole on Lincoln's Cheek, The States Talking, and The Miracle on the Danube, were all very patriotic in nature, with crowds responding favorably. But unbeknownst to anyone, these 3 productions would be the last at the Arlington Street Theater. Attorney Richard Owsley, son of the current Playhouse president, looked out of his office window on Wednesday, March 25, 1942, to see the Youngstown Playhouse ablaze a short distance away. With damages of $2,500, much of the set storage area was destroyed, along with many costumes. This fire left the Playhouse totally unusable. But just as the community rallied for the war effort, they rallied for the Playhouse, offering them other locations for rehearsal and storage. Without missing a beat, the next scheduled Playhouse production, The Circle, would open at James Hillman Junior High School. The fire had been devastating to Walde Playhouse. It was their home, their firstborn, so to speak. Although not officially credited to her, Board President Mrs. Charles F. Owsley expressed the sentiment of everyone.
When we pass, let it be at night, late at night. We want no alien souls around. We shall wish to pause and listen. What shall we hear? Only the lonesome wind? Or will there be voices? To some of us maybe will float the ghosts of distant words. We at least shall not cease to remember. With pleasure and affection, 123 Arlington.
The founders of the Youngstown Playhouse were dreamers. Dreamers who believed in themselves, the community, and in the worth of the arts. There remains one sole survivor from that March 25th fire, a constant reminder of the dreamers who made their dreams come true, the slightly charred Playhouse sign from the Arlington Street Theater. Camille at Roaring Camp would open the new Youngstown Playhouse on Market Street in June of 1942. It would also be the swan song for then-director Theodore Veman, who would be replaced by John Ross Winnie. The Playhouse's 19th season, their first full one on Market Street, would open with Petticoat Fever by Mark Reed and would be a huge success.
Well, the Market Street Theater, as we all know, was just a small, I don't know if it was a former movie house or not, but you had to walk in to get down to the dressing room, down a flight of stairs off of the main street. Then you had to go through a small door, and you were in where the dressing room was. And then the stage was very small.
Support for the war effort at the Playhouse was huge. They had banner displays of buy war bonds and stamps, save scrap, it may save you. But there was also another movement going on at the same time, and that was the youth theater movement. Winnie's wife, Mary Jane, took over the youth theater program at the Playhouse when Winnie came to the Playhouse. And she injected a whole new energy into this program, which culminated in a production of Toad Hall by A.A. Milne.
The biggest hit of the season would be the Claire Booth Luce comedy, The Women. Composed of a cast of 39 women, Vindicator critic Jane Lamb summed up the evening with, "A better group of hair-pulling females could hardly have been corralled from Youngstown. Even Esther Hamilton, famous Vindicator columnist, made her first and only stage appearance." But The Women would mark the end of Winnie's short Playhouse career, as he was drafted for military service as Lieutenant J.G. in the U.S. Navy. He attended the opening performance and left directly afterward, having directed 5 shows at the Playhouse. The year would close out with the hiring of his replacement, Talbot Pearson.